today there's a lot more going on in the world with social media than there was even 5 years ago. I mean, every day it seems some new media outlet is being promoted and being pushed to try to get people to be interactive with each other on it. Today we have, at the time that we're talking, we've got Twitter and Facebook and, these video apps too. Vine was popular a while ago, and now there's TikTok and there's Snapchat and there's all these media outlets that are in existence, and I've left some out for sure. And the question has become in the Lord's church, can we utilize social media to promote the gospel? And, if we do that, what are the ways that we do it? How do we approach it? Is it right to do it? And I've heard arguments on both sides of people saying that it's wrong to do because there's a lot of sin on these outlets too. I mean, for every good tweet, there's probably 10 to 20 bad ones. Sure. And for every good Facebook post, there's 10 to 20 bad ones. And Snapchat especially is a harder app to utilize in a Christian way because many people are utilizing that for a negative light.
Sure.
But the question is, what would you do if someone says, can we really use social media to spread the gospel?
I think absolutely, and I think we should be using it. That's my personal take on it. We have to remember social media is simply a tool. It's the latest tool that people use to communicate. And it's unfortunate. You hear a lot of negative when it comes to from the standpoint of, okay, well people are using that more so than person-to-person communication, and I get that. What it's made available for us is almost an immediate interaction with someone in a way that 20 years ago was almost unheard of, but especially 50 years ago, and so. But like you say, even in 5 years and even in this past year, there are new and trendy things. Some things obviously probably won't stick as well. Some things will do really, really good. And so you think about the big ones, especially Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter are the big three probably. You have some others that are in there that can be used, and we can talk about how to use those. But should we be using them? And I've since early on in the beginning of social media, my thought was, I'm sure the devil was going to use this in a way that's going to be negative, but shouldn't Christians be using it in a way that's positive?
Right.
There again, we're in a world where this is the reality. We live in a world that has evil all around, and yet we're to be salt and light to the world. And so how can we do that? Well, we can do that. We do that every day in our lives, but certainly we should be doing it in even our social lives, and that's where we're out with other people, even if we're technically in, where we're in Facebook and some of those other things. So, the outlet where we are right now, the Gospel Broadcasting Network, they use social media very well, and it goes out, all over the world. And there are numerous ones, and congregations have finally gotten on board with this. And I've worked in places where it wasn't very popular to use such, and in fact, elders were scared to death to use it. So you have to approach those things. Obviously, when people are not using it regularly to begin with in their lives, and then you have a younger generation comes along and they're using it and they're saying, well, why don't we have a church Facebook group? Why don't we all these other things? Where that's just one more way we can communicate. And so elders have to really look at that hard and say, I may not be using it, but is this something that can benefit the church? And so you have to find some tech savvy young people basically to run that. And you obviously you can set parameters and boundaries and all of those things, and here's what we want on it and here's what we don't want on it, and help people understand that, and then let people put it out there, put encouraging messages out there, put Bible scriptures out there, put Facebook posts, when it's in the proper setting, in a closed group, it can be a way to communicate things that are of a more personal nature, maybe a prayer request, things like that, So there are a number of ways, but when we're talking about spreading the gospel, evangelizing, that is the number one tool of communication today. And so we should be using it. Certainly the devil's out there using it for his purpose. We need to spread the gospel, and we can use that.
But I think that's some of the things that you touched on is, elders are scared to death of it, and elders are primarily older men. And we're in that situation right now where a generation is coming up that knows more about technology than the generation before it, obviously, because we're doing more with it. We're constantly enamored by what's going on with technology and the latest tech that's coming out. And I think one of the ways to talk about this is many elders are worried to death that by utilizing social media, a negative review will be put upon the church, or negative comments and cursing and things of that nature. And you mentioned it a moment ago, there are certain private outlets on social media that allow us to talk in a more private setting. And I know of a lot of congregations that do closed groups. And what those closed groups are all about is so-and-so has fallen and they've broken their hip. They're in this hospital, no visitors at this time, but please pray for them.
Right.
Or this is going to be happening. Don't forget our trunk or treat is coming up. You know, all these different outlets that they have, and that's just it. Jesus went where the people were.
Right.
And I agree with that 100%. And the same way that when door knocking was the number one way to go and contact people, social media today is I can type a message, and in the moment it takes to hit return or enter, it's automatically being sent to them. And the way most people are, they're automatically reading it.
Yeah.
And so I can, for instance, when you and I text, I can text you something, and 2 seconds later, I see the little bubbles come up that means you're writing back to me.
Right.
And to think that we have that at our fingertips, and to sit there and think about the Great Commission, that the apostles were told to go into all the world. Okay, well, that commission is also for Christians, to go into the world and teach the gospel to every creature. So then the question becomes, back then they didn't have social media. They didn't have airplanes either. You think they would have utilized the airport if they had the ability to? I think Paul would have definitely done that.
Right.
And you sit there and think, okay, if they had airports, they would have used them. If they had cars, they would have used them. If they had buses and trains, they would have used them. So why would we suggest that they wouldn't have used social media? I think they would have had a balance to it. Sure. I think they would have said, well, we won't only use social media, but I think they would have understood, hey, this is where the people are. And we go where the people are. We teach the people that we can contact, and we do what we can to put the gospel before as many people as possible. And I think the apostles would have a podcast, and be sharing it on social media and doing the things that they do to promote that, because it's another outlet to promote the gospel. And so can we use it? I mean, why aren't we?
Yeah.
And honestly, a challenge that I would want to give to congregations that aren't using it is contact GBN about how to use it effectively.
Sure.
Contact people that are very savvy in the technology world and realm and say, what can we do to get this working? And I know some people have a budget and it's really hard to go all out. But there are a lot of affordable ways now that you can stream your services, and Facebook is free. Twitter and Instagram are free. And you can utilize all of these things. You don't have to do the pay for ads to allow those ads to be shown of your congregation. You can promote it very easily by just having a Facebook account and sharing it to the friends that you have.
Right.
And so congregations do need to keep up with the way the world is going, because in the next 30 years, there will be elders that are right now younger people who are learning about this technology, and the easiest way for the church to continue to thrive is for us to do what we can to keep the church going.
Right.
Instead of saying, hey, when you take over, you can finally do what you want to do.
Right.
That's a horrible mindset to have, that we're going to do it this way, and then when you get to where you can be an elder, you can decide however you want to do it.
And when Facebook is the old way now, when those people are coming up, Facebook's going to be old and not the newest.
No, and
thing,
I mean, because years ago, MySpace was the biggest thing.
Right.
And Facebook quickly took care of that. And I mentioned even earlier in our conversation, Vine was this viral app that went out of business. It was shut down.
Yeah.
And this time next year, some of the things that are so popular could very easily be shut down, and something new has come out, and something else is there. And so, like you said, we can talk about all of the different things and maybe how to utilize it and how not to utilize it, but I think it's important to understand that some things are just not going to be able to be used. Like, for instance, it's going to be hard to use some apps that are primarily used for things that are not necessarily appropriate. I can't get on, an app like Tinder and try to promote the gospel.
Right.
That's just not going to work
Right.
because it's not designed for that.
Yeah.
And so use social media, yeah, but not every social media outlet.
Right.
So we have to understand that just because God said to go where the people are, He didn't mean that we go into the bars and we go into,
Right.
less than favorable establishments and say, well, I'm just doing it to preach the gospel.
Right.
That's just not going to work. So use social media, but in the right way. But then it gets to this point. Okay, so someone wants to use social media. So can they behave in a negative way on social media and destroy the reputation of the church? And so, what would you do if someone says, well, how does our behavior on social media bring a negative or positive light to Christ?
Well, I think regardless of, the preaching aspect of it, let's set that aside for just a moment. Our lives out in the public, we're talking about person to person. We're told that we're the salt of the earth, we're the light of the world, Matthew 5:13-16. And we're to let our lights shine. So there was the intent that we would be out in the world,
Right.
letting our light shine, and the opportunity to glorify the Father, on that behalf. So when you add to that an individual who says, I want to use social media, I want to post a passage of Scripture, and some of our Bible programs, give us sometimes a picture or a way that I can put a Bible verse on a mountain background,
Right.
Backdrop, and it looks real nice, looks real pretty, and I can fancy the words and do all that, and then I could post that, or there's a bunch of people that already posted something like that, and I could share that post. Well, that's an encouraging post. I appreciate that. Or that's a good article, and I love that article from Apologetics Press, and it has to do with, teaching more about Christ and living like Christ, and then they turn around though, and on the next post that they make, or somewhere down the road later that day, they're out in town and they're
Right.
at a party and there's alcohol involved, or they're scantily dressed and something like that. And so yes, that can hurt the influence. You just sent out this post saying, this is how Jesus wants us to live, right. And then you go and you live just the opposite of that. Well, that's the world is already chomping at the bit to basically say we're hypocrites anyway. Mm-hmm. And so why would you give them that fuel? And so yes, that can show the church in a bad light. It can show Christ in a bad light. It can show the gospel in a bad light. And we're reminded that we're to behave or have our conduct so that it becomes as a Christian, yeah. and so that we need to act like Christians. In other words, that's what Paul's saying, Philippians 1 verse 27. So, right. We are the light of the earth. We're the light of the world. Rather, we're the salt of the earth. That means that we have an influence, and so wherever we go, whatever we do, whatever we post, is going to have an influential effect on those who receive it, or those who are across from us, or those who we're walking beside, or those who we're hanging out with, whatever the case may be. None of that's changed. Social media just makes it more quickly available, right. Really, in many ways, and not just to your best friends, maybe, but the whole world gets to see it, mm-hmm. Possibly, because that's what social media is, makes it available for, right. All the world, in that way. And so, yes, we have to be careful. We can, obviously, it can be for good or it can be for bad, and the way that we live our lives and the posts that we make and frankly, our attitude sometimes in even making a good post, yeah. could be a problem.
Yeah, and you think about doing the Christian scan when you're on social media. Mm-hmm. You look and you go, okay, if I'm going to share this, is there any profanity in it? Is there anything? Right. Is there any immodesty in it? Is there any? Okay, we're good there. And then you share it. And what happened to me one time was I didn't know that when you hit share, it also shares the name of the page.
Yeah.
And I didn't read the name of the page. Yeah. The name of the page was inappropriate. Mm-hmm. And so here I am as a Christian, and I've just shared something. And no one knows that I didn't know that.
Right.
And so thankfully people believe the best first, and they sent me back and said, hey, there's profanity in the title up at the top there. I don't know if you saw that. Oh, I didn't. Let me change that. And that's just it. We do that Christian scan, and you see something and you're like, man, that'd be so funny if they didn't put that word in there.
Yeah.
And you have to sit there and say, if I'm going to be different, I have to act and live different.
Yeah.
And what is becoming so common now is jobs that are being put out there, companies are going to say, we'd like to look at your social media accounts.
Yeah.
And we want to see how you behave. We want to see what type of person we're bringing onto the company. And some jobs have a no posting policy. You're not going to post anything, without our approval, because how you act reflects on us. And just for instance, a recent example of this, Cleveland Browns had a defensive back who, after a game, made threatening tweets to the media and said literally that he was going to kill a media member. He was released by Cleveland. And Cleveland said, we're not having that. Now, I don't think he really meant he was going to kill that person, but what he said was that he was going to. And what he had posted on social media put a negative light not just on him, but on the organization that he represented. And you see a lot of that happening where people will tweet or say something and it's, okay, you're gone. We don't want that. We're not going to have that. You can say what you want to say, but not when you represent us.
Right.
Because it's not just you anymore. And that's the thing, like you mentioned, we as Christians have to remember what Philippians 1:27 talks about, letting our conduct be worthy of the gospel. And if someone looks at me and, like you said, they see that on one post I say, well, I'm a Christian, I promote Jesus Christ, and then literally a couple posts later it's, hey, check out this hilarious thing that I found, and it's one of the most inappropriate things that we can find.
Right.
And I've actually seen this before by deacons in the Lord's church, people that I know that are deacons, and they share something that they shouldn't share. And it's something that, it's just not appropriate. It's not right. And I've even at times messaged those people in confidence and said, why did you share that?
Yeah.
What was the reasoning behind that? Because that doesn't come across very Christ-like. And I can't imagine Jesus Christ having a Facebook page and doing some of the things that we're talking about. and Jesus, tweeting out, love one another, and then a post later having an alcoholic beverage in his hand and tweeting, this night was awesome.
Right.
And I just can't fathom Jesus Christ doing something like that. And in 1 Corinthians 11:1, I'm to imitate the image of Christ. And I'm supposed to be a picture perfect as best as possible of Jesus Christ. And I can't do that if I'm going to do things that he wouldn't do
Right.
in the social media realm. And so we have to remember that when we log on, it's not just that my 3 friends will see it that I want to see. There are things that we say go viral. They didn't expect to go viral, but they go viral.
Right.
And there are so many examples of this where someone just does this video that they intended for their family to see.
Yeah.
And people started sharing it like crazy. And now all of a sudden they look up and they're on Jimmy Fallon and they're on all these different media outlets that are even in television, and they're talking about this video they made sitting in their car that they had no idea millions of people would see.
Right.
And that's the risk we take. Any tweet, any post, any picture can easily be seen by millions of people. And knowing that that type of influence does exist, even if you don't think it's likely, knowing that that type of influence does exist means that as a Christian, I have to read, reread, and triple read the things I'm going to say. I have to continuously, and it's like I said, it's like a Christian scan.
Yeah.
I look at the picture I'm going to post, because if I go to a concert, I might be dressed appropriately, but someone behind me might not be.
Right.
And I need to look at the picture and go, oh, I probably don't want to share that because that person behind me is wearing next to nothing and I didn't know they were in the picture. Let's move and get another picture. And that's the thing that being a Christian means, is I sacrifice what would be easy and what might be funny and what might be really simple to share, to be a person that when someone looks at me, they say, you know what, he's a good person. And elders especially are told to have a good report of those that are without, but that's a Christian quality too.
Right.
You don't want to say, well, that's just an elder thing, because if someone says, well, that girl would be a really good Christian if it weren't for all these other things she said, or that guy would be a really good man and Christian if it wasn't for all the things that he tweeted and all the pictures he posted.
Right.
And that's, negative light or mindset toward Christ is like we talked about. We have a responsibility to spread the gospel, and you catch more flies with honey than you do with something that's worse. You've got to be aware of what we're doing.
Right.
And I think it's become so commonplace of what we're going to post that we just don't even think about it anymore. And I remember when I worked here at GBN, I was told, think about what you post. And so I started really kind of evaluating, why was I posting that? What was I posting it for? And what I realized was, I didn't really need to be posting as much as I was posting.
Right.
And so I started utilizing social media in a completely different light for me, that I'm going to post the things that need to be posted. And if I want to post something, I will. But if you checked my Facebook profile, you wouldn't find a ton of activity. Not because I think it's wrong to have a ton of activity, but that's just not me. Because I've realized, you know what? There's not a whole lot of stuff I need to post anyway. I'll post the things that are needed to be posted, but I mean, it's not. I don't have to post a picture of a sandwich and tell people it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon and here I am. I'm going to eat a sandwich.
Right.
Social media has a powerful impact on our society, and it's going to continue to have such until something else comes along and knocks it off a pedestal. And what happens in companies, I'll say this and then I've got another question for you, but companies die because they refuse to adapt. Churches will die if they refuse to adapt and utilize these things, using them in the right way. But if a church says that's just never going to be us, well, don't be surprised if you don't reach anybody.
Right.
Because you're not going where the people are. But the final thing is motives. We have a lot of things that happen today and a lot of people that want to spread the gospel on social media. So the question has to become, do our motives matter when we decide to spread the gospel via social media? What would you do if someone asked you that?
Yeah, and kind of to piggyback off the last question, from the standpoint, we should never behave in such a way that whether the person is behind a computer or whether we're in person with somebody or we're on our phone and a tablet or whatever the case, we have to remember we still represent Christ. Right. That's ultimately where this all comes to. And so, yes, motives always matter. Right. I think about having pure motives in what we do. Pure motives lead the day, so to speak. And if I want to do right things, then my motives need to come from a pure heart, a pure place. And so what would that look like? It would be, I would say, the love of God. His love toward me should motivate me. That should be a motive, that I have to do what I do. That could be one. Right. My love for others. Love for souls, thinking about that. My love for God, would motivate me, in response to His love for me. My love for Him would cause me to want to post, Acts 2:38, right. Or Mark 16:16. Here's just a passage. Go read this scripture. This is important. The world needs to know it. Those are pure motives. My love of family. When I post things, and I use social media. I have a Facebook page. I have an Instagram page. I do those things. I still have a Twitter page. I don't use it near as much. Right. Sometimes I just attach it to my others, so I automatically tweet something even if I didn't really mean to. It's kind of built that way. But when I think about posting something from a pure motive, my love of the church, my love for my family, my love for God, His love for me, those are pure things, and so my wanting to post something needs to come from a place such as that. And I would add, something else to this idea of, you talk about posting things that sometimes have other things attached to them. Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of times when we post maybe a news, something comes across, right. A news post, and we post that, and then what we sometimes forget about that's going to be a link to that news outlet's page and what they're posting, or to that article, and then what you're going to have underneath it are the responses on their Facebook page, right. to that article or to that event or whatever it is. And so, I can't be responsible for all those things. Right. And, and sometimes there's thousands of comments. If it's a newsworthy post, there's going to be thousands of comments on that. I'm not going to spend all day, so I might have to, make a post, and I might have to say, beware of comments, on their page or something like that, and warn people off, this is not, that part's not me, but I want you to know that this traumatic event happened, this thing happened, because that's how news is shared. News is also shared through social media. Yeah. And so sometimes we help in the spreading of that news of a tragic event, a devastating tornado hit so-and-so town, and you know, here's what's happening, you know. And so, but anyway, you know, sometimes people will get on there and trolls, we call them, and there will be this back and forth, and they're just trying to get they're trying to have a 5-minute, you know, opportunity for fame, you know, on running on the back of this post.
Right.
And so, but anyway, so while I can't catch everything that's out there, I think people know also my character, and so if they do see something, then please ask.
Right.
You know, please, you know, send me a message. Say, hey, did you know that this had this? You know, and I've had that happen too. You know, and it does. I think we all don't quickly assume the worst.
Right.
You know, when things like that happen. But I think that brethren should help check one another.
Yeah.
That's what we're supposed to do, you know. That thing that we think about, you know, iron working against iron, you know, and what does it do? It makes us sharper. It makes us shine brighter.
Right.
In that way, it cleans us up.
Right.
And so when I think about then the fact when we talk about social media, when we talk about posting, our own posts, whether personal or evangelistic minded, need to be those that are truthful. You know, how many times do you see somebody post something that they haven't? I mean, we talk about fact checking. You know, is this even a real thing?
Right.
You know, sometimes it's not at all. You know, sometimes it's just a funny, and it just needs to be taken as a funny and move on. If you don't think it's funny, you don't have to. Sometimes I say things and it's not really. I think it's funny in my mind. You know, the bubbles are working, but nobody's responding. You know, but at the same time, you know, we are responsible for what we put out there, and so we can be called on it if we need to.
Well, that's just it. I can't be responsible for what everyone does that I'm friends with too.
Sure.
I'm friends with people that I went to high school with that don't share the same values I share.
Yeah.
And so I can't be responsible for what they share. I can be responsible for what they put on my wall and what they put on my page, but I can't be responsible for what's on their page.
Yeah. But we can protect
But
that.
we can protect it.
With our privacy settings and things too.
We can do what we can
Even
to
church
make sure.
pages.
Right. We don't have to just say, well, that's just the way Facebook was intended, so we'll just let them. No, you do what you need to do to protect Christ. But I think when I think about motives, there were people in Scripture whose motives were never pure. I mean, Absalom stood at the gate in 2 Samuel 15, 2 through 6, and would tell people, man, if we only had a king that cared about you like I did. You know, if only David loved you like I love you.
Right.
And then Judas is one that said, why didn't we sell this oil and give the money to the poor? But the Bible tells me that he didn't say that in John 12, 4 through 5 because he cared for people. He said it because he was a thief and he had the money bag.
He wanted the money.
And so I guess the question is, when I post something on social media as a preacher, what is my motivation behind it? You know, Jesus preached for 3 years. He never made it on the lecture circuit. He never went around and did a bunch of gospel meetings. He was put on a cross for his ministry. And so if my motivation is to get on a lecture circuit, to get on the gospel meeting circuit, I really don't need to be posting for that reason. I need to be posting because people's souls are lost and they need to be saved, and motives matter. They mattered in the Old Testament and the New Testament, and they matter today.
Yeah, I think so.
But ultimately, social media works. It's a good tool to use as long as we use it correctly and do what God wants us to do with it.
Let's be salt and light to the world, and we can use social media to do that. Let's just have pure motives.
I know that my Redeemer lives. I know eternal life He gives. I know that my Redeemer lives.